Hey everyone, it's Nick, and in today's video I'm going to be going over Ubuntu and Linux and open source, and just kind of giving you a quick introduction to Ubuntu and what some of the commands are, what the GUI is like in comparison to Windows, and just giving you a quick introduction on how to use it, why some of the things are different, why they work the way they do. Just sort of intro, but at the same time I want to give sort of a bigger wide scope of how you can use it in the future once you start to become more proficient with it, things that you can work towards, and first things first, Ubuntu, Linux, open source, all that sort of stuff is free. I mean, that's what it is. That's what open source is. It's open to anyone. And Ubuntu is a free download. And if you want to install it at home, you don't actually have to install it on your host computer. You don't have to replace Windows and get rid of all your files. You can download VM Player from their website. And there we go. That wasn't working a second ago. You can download VM Player, which is a free piece of software which you can install virtual machines with. As you can see here, myvmware.com. Hopefully you're watching this video in 1080p so you can see this URL. You can either type it out yourself, or if I remember, I'll put a link in the description. Currently the latest version, the major version, is 6, and the minor version is 6.0.7, so you can stick with that. And then you download it, you install it, and then you can install a VM. So in order to download Ubuntu, you can just Google Ubuntu download. You can go to the Ubuntu website, and from this download tab you have a couple different options. You can go to server or desktop. Right now I'm on the desktop download page. If you want, you can download Ubuntu 16.04.1, which is LTS. Currently that's the latest version. 16.10 actually just released, I believe, 2 days ago. So yeah, you can go ahead and download either one of those. There's also actually alternative download and torrent links if you want. So here's the network installer for the different versions available there. There's BitTorrent links, and typically torrenting has this like negative connotation around it. But remember that with open source software, it's a very legitimate way to distribute it. It's free, so you can download it however you want and share it however you want, because currently, when you're working with open source stuff, typically if someone's making a new release, if somebody was like doing a smaller startup kind of thing and they wanted to make their own version of Linux and share it with people, they might be hard to host a server and a web page that is able to handle the amount of bandwidth it takes to download an ISO file for an installation. But with torrenting, if you have a big network of people who are sharing this, then once again, a fairly legitimate way. And if you don't have the greatest internet connection, torrenting is also going to be a little bit faster than doing a traditional download straight from the website. So just keep in mind a couple of options. Currently I'm using Ubuntu 16.04.1. I downloaded it like last week and installed it 2 days ago on this VM that I'm going to be using. One thing that I want you to note is that it is an LTS version, so I went ahead and popped open the description for what is LTS. And LTS stands for long-term support. So typically Ubuntu desktop and server, a new version releases about every 6 months. That means you'll have the latest and greatest applications, blah blah blah. And an LTS version is released every 2 years. In previous versions of LTS, they've had 3 years of support on Ubuntu desktop and 5 years of support on Ubuntu server. So if you were actually using Ubuntu to run a web server or a file server, something that you were actually going to be using and it's going to be public facing, many people can access it, you wouldn't necessarily want to be running like a middle version, like a Ubuntu 13, because the support on it isn't going to last as long. You're going to want those, up-to-date updates and all that sort of stuff. So currently the latest LTS version is 16. So go ahead and download that and install it with VM Player, and you can just go ahead and mess around without ever having to interfere with your actual host machine and getting rid of Windows. You can also use VirtualBox, I believe, on Mac, so go ahead, try it out. It's free, so might as well. Anyways, that kind of covers Linux and what it is. how to download it. Versus Windows, I kind of want to just give you a quick idea of the file structure. So from the left-hand side here, by default, my Files pane is there. And that goes ahead and sort of launches this screen. And if we want to go ahead and quickly compare it to Windows 7, it kind of looks like when you're staring at this default screen at your My Computer, where you have your different drives and these files down the side. So just kind of get an idea of what we have here. We have our documents, computer, desktop downloads, all that sort of neat stuff, and it's pretty much the same here. You know, we have our home, desktop, documents, downloads, music, pictures, videos, trash, network, computer, floppy disk, if you still have one of those, and yeah. So here, when you click on computer, once again, I just want to draw the comparison to Windows 7. It's the same thing as sort of clicking on the C drive. So on Windows, we have Windows, users, program files, perf logs. On Ubuntu, we have a little bit more. We have bin, boot, dev, etc, home, lib, lib64, media, mount, opt, proc, root, run, sbin, snap, serve, sys, temp, user, and var, as well as a couple of files down here. Typically, you're going to be looking at folders like etc. You're going to be looking at home, which has different users in there. You're going to be looking at stuff like sbin, temp, user, var. Those are some of the more common ones. But I just kind of wanted to, you know, give you an idea of what that's like. So once again, to draw the comparison to Windows, if we go to home and then user, we can see that we have my user, Nick, desktop, documents, downloads, music, pictures, public, templates, videos. To go back to Windows, if you go to users, same as home, and then I go to my user, which is just user, I have all these: contacts, desktop, downloads, favorites, links, documents, music, pictures, videos, save games, searches. So you can see the direct comparison here. Like 8 out of 10 of those are the same, and then each of them have their own little variation there. So obviously, these would just be used to store your different sort of media for all your different users, and the same thing exists in Ubuntu. So downloads, it's where you download things. That's the default folder to where your downloads go. You can have pictures where you store your videos. Just kidding. You store your pictures there. So, or I mean, whatever, but just, you know, giving you an idea here of how this works, and what's generally expected of it. And then, once again, on the left-hand pane here, we have desktop, documents, downloads, music, videos, trash, network. So this is more of a direct link to our individual users' home drive. So we have, once again, a couple options here: computer, home, Nick, and then you can see home lights up right away on this left-hand pane. So check it out. Home's not highlighted, but when I go to home, Nick, home's highlighted because this is my home drive. So that's where I store my stuff, and that's enough about me talking about your home drive. Next thing I want to talk about is, oh yes, the GUI. I downloaded Ubuntu Server, and when you typically download Ubuntu Server, you have no GUI at all. It's just a command line. It's just black background on white text. The one thing I can compare it to that you may be familiar with is the Windows command line. It pretty much looks exactly like this, with no, you know, like window around it or anything. It's just black background with white text. I can't say it any more plainly than that. So what you can actually do to install the GUI for Ubuntu, you have a couple different options, because once again, what we're dealing with open source here, you could make your own GUI for Ubuntu if you wanted to. But there's tons of ones that already exist out there. So I ran sudo, and I'll talk about these commands in a second, apt-get install Ubuntu desktop, and it's asking me for my password, and then it doesn't do anything because I already have it. So let's just break down this command. Sudo, or sudo as some people call it. This stands for switch user do. So basically, When you're dealing with Windows, you have your administrator accounts. Those are the accounts that have like full control over your system, and they can make all the changes they want. They can install updates, they can install software, remove software, add user accounts, change passwords, all that sort of stuff. For Linux, we have our sudoers, as it's called, that the users who are allowed to switch user do. And that means that you're switching user to the root user, and the root user is like the main user for a Linux system. They have full control, full permissions, and you're running a command. So if I just do apt-get install Ubuntu desktop, I cannot lock the file. Let's see, it says could not open locked file, unable to lock the administration directory, and then it says, are you root? So by using switch user do, I'm temporarily allowing my user to have root privileges to install Ubuntu desktop. And that's what I did to get this GUI. So if you have no GUI at all, if you choose to download Ubuntu server, you can run this, and then when you reboot, you'll get brought to this GUI here, and you'll have all this, and it'll be nice and pretty, and they have a cool little background. And yeah, that's that. So apt-get install Ubuntu desktop. The rest of that, sort of self-explanatory to an extent. Apt-get install. Apt-get is like the package manager for Ubuntu and similar Linux flavors, as they're called. So Ubuntu is kind of part of this like Debian group of operating systems. If you want, you could also download Debian. I think Debian 8's out now. I haven't really messed with that in a while, but all the commands are the same. It just looks a little bit different. Some of the stuff on the GUI and on this like sidebar and everything, it's going to be a bit different, but when you actually get into the terminal and you start messing around with things, you'll realize that the commands are the same, things work the same way. It's just mostly aesthetics. But yeah, so we run apt-get, which is how we install files, install Ubuntu desktop. If you want, you could also substitute install with remove, and then that would delete Ubuntu desktop. And then, yeah, because we already have Ubuntu desktop installed, what it did here was it says Ubuntu desktop is already the newest version, 0 upgrades, 0 newly installed, 0 to remove, and 49 not upgraded. So no new files were upgraded, none of them were newly installed, none were removed, and 49 of them were not upgraded. So if we have outdated software, you can run the install command again, and then that'll give you the most up-to-date version of it. So let's go ahead and install, let's go ahead and do sudo apt-get install. We're going to install a program called Nmap. So let's just give you the process of what this looks like. You hit Y for yes, and then it does its little thing. Give it a few seconds. Okay, we're done. So now Nmap is installed. And whenever that happens, whenever you install something, your terminal usually gets kind of messy. So if I had this full screen and I was thinking to myself, that's not too pleasant to look at, what you can do is you can type in clear. And there goes everything you just did. Except not really, because if you just scroll up, then you can see that all it does is it sort of gives a break in the text and throws everything else up at the top of the screen. So there's something to keep in mind if you're just looking to keep your workspace clear, because sometimes when you're doing commands and it's giving you output, it can be kind of hard to like scroll up and look at a wall of text and identify exactly what you want. So by using clear, it's a lot easier to sort of just keep track of what you're doing if you're doing work that requires that attention to detail. So we installed Nmap. Now let's go ahead and go over a couple other simple commands. So we reviewed how to install different programs, what those commands are. Let's go over one of the commands I'll be using the most, cd. So cd stands for change directory. And if you type in cd space / you can see here. See how our our little terminal updated. It doesn't look very different, but you'll notice that there's a slash here, and before there's this little tilde sign. So let's go ahead and try what happens when we do cd with a little tilde sign. Okay, we're back to tilde. Well, what exactly does that mean? Let's use the ls command, which is basically a list. It lists what's in your directory, what current folder you're in. And here we see documents, desktop, downloads, music, pictures, public, templates, videos. This is exactly what we were talking about earlier. This is my home drive. So if you do cd tilde, it takes you to your home drive. So let's try cd documents to go into my documents folder. And let's use ls list to see what's in there. There's nothing in there. Okay, well, let's go cd tilde again. Boom, we're back to my home drive. ls, there's everything. And if we do cd downloads, oh, wait a second, that downloads doesn't exist. That's because I didn't use a capital D. Remember that when you're changing directory, capitals matter. Okay, so cd downloads with a capital D, go to downloads. Is there anything in here? Nope. Alright, well, let's just go ahead and make a file. Let's make a file. So if we use the command touch, and then we'll name our file. Let's name it name a file. And then we can use ls, and then boom, we can see that name a file exists. So let's see what's in name a file. So we can use the command cat to display what's in name a file. Well, there's nothing in it. I mean, the command worked, because if it didn't, it would return text. It would give us a list of what's in that file. Alright, well, let's go ahead and use nano name a file, which is a text editor. Nano is a text editor. There are tons of text editors on Ubuntu. So on Windows, you typically stick to Notepad just by default, though a lot of people like to use Notepad++, or if you're like me, you love Sublime Text. You know, and those are just different ways to edit text files. So let's go ahead and just type in, this is a test. And I'll go ahead and hit Control X. As you can see here in the bottom, we have a ton of different options. And whenever we see this little caret, that means control. So I'm going to hit Control and X at the same time. And it says Save Modified Buffer. Answering no will destroy changes. So we have a couple options. Yes, no, cancel. So I'm going to hit Control C, because maybe I want to add a little bit more first. This is a test. Is it working? And then I'm going to hit Control X again, and this time I'm going to hit Y, and then it says file name to write. And I'm going to name it the same file, because if we name it something different, we're going to create a second file. So let's do that, and now let's use cat. So by using the arrow keys, you can cycle through your history of commands. So I'm going to use cat, and then boom, it tells me what's in the file. This is a test. Is it working? Obviously, it did. But let's try this again. Let's try it with gedit, name a file. And if you saw there, I'm not that great at typing. I'm good, but I'm not that good. I hit N, and then by using tab, it autofills. So it guesses, because there's no other files that start with N in this directory, I can hit tab and it finishes. Alright, so I'm going to use gedit and name a file. And then you can see it pops open in a different text editor. This is a test. Is it working? So we're going to say yes, now with gedit. And then this looks more like your typical text editor. So obviously we can just hit save right here. And then you can see we get some information down here in our terminal as we go ahead and edit it. And then we're going to go back through our commands and cat name a file. Boom, this is a test. Is it working? Yes, now with gedit. So you can see there's a few different ways we were able to actually manipulate that file. And as one last thing, I want to go touch, name a second file. And now when I try to use my text editor, name, nano name, and I'm hitting tab here, you can see it autofills to the point where the files start to be different. So I hit nano nama, and then if I hit tab again, it gives me a list of the file options I have. So nano name a file or nano name a second file. Which one are you referring to? So let's try one more thing. Touch, and I'm going to use a completely different letter. Just touch gone. And if we go through nano name, and so I'm going to do name, and then I hit tab, it autofills to A. I hit tab again, and see that it's not displaying the file G, because obviously I'm not looking for that, because I've already typed nama. So it only gives me the files that fall under that category of naming, or however you want to look at it. So that's a quick little talk about how to edit files. Next, I kind of want to skip over to, actually let's do one thing first. So I'm going to use rm, and we're going to rm go. So rm cannot remove go, no such file or directory. ls, oh right, it was gone, so rm gone. And then we do ls, and that's gone. So rm is the remove command. It's used for deleting files or folders. Oh yeah, one last thing that I wanted to show is that, remember, we can use cd and then the tilde key to go back to our home directory, or we can use cd dot dot, we can use cd dot dot to go back one file, so we go up one in our file hierarchy. So when we were in downloads before, here we can see our files, we go up one to the home directory. So let's go to something like etc, where we're going to have multiple files in each other. So you can see in the top here we have this like path of files. If you were to do cd dot dot from here, it would take you back to apport, and if you do cd dot dot, it would take you back to etc, and if you did cd dot dot, it would take you back to the root directory. So that's that. Let's even try it there. See? cd dot dot home, cd dot dot the slash. So that's that. That's sort of navigating through the folders and files and editing them and using different text editors, and kind of a big mess of commands there. So I don't know, try it out on your own. This stuff all becomes more relevant as you actually start to work with different software and work with different services, because you'll realize how often you're going to have to be editing configuration files, or you know, making new files or something like that. One last thing though that I keep forgetting here, let's cd to that file or folder. So there's one command here, pwd. pwd stands for print working directory, and it tells you exactly where you are. So we are in /home/nic/downloads. If you were ever wondering, because sometimes, like especially if you're not using the GUI, it won't tell you exactly what file you're located in or which folder that you're working in right now. It won't tell you that. So you have to use pwd sometimes if all you have is like a plain, you know, command line interface. Sometimes you might have to use that command. So pwd, remember, print working directory, ls is list, cd is change directory, rm is remove. A lot of these things kind of make sense, you know? It's not just random. Next thing I want to talk about, let's talk about users. So from this little button up here, this little start button, you can type in user accounts, and it's going to open the user account page. And here we can see that currently I only have one user, me, Nick, and I can do oh right, so in the top right hand corner I have to click unlock to make changes. So if I do that, I can authenticate with my password, and now you can see that this is no longer grayed out. I can hit the plus button, and I can make a user. Let's call this one John, and if you want, you can be more specific with his full name, like John Few, and then his username could just be John if you wanted to, or vice versa. Full name John, username John 2 if you had 2 Johns. I'll just keep it standard here and just go John. And then the account type, we have 2 options, administrator or standard. I'm just going to keep him as a standard. We'll go ahead and add him. And then let's go ahead and his account is currently disabled, so let's give him a password. Set password now. I'll just use something dumb. And as you can see, change is grayed out. The new password is not strong enough. Okay, well, geez, I gotta be better than just the word password. So let's do the word password with an exclamation mark and a 1 at the end. It's still not good enough. Okay, let's use something else completely different. So there we get a rating of good. Maybe if we put an exclamation mark at the end, we get a rating of strong. You can show password, Ubuntu desktop, exclamation mark. So change. And now his password or his account is enabled, and we can use his. So you can type in SU, and that stands for switch user, and then we can go to John. His password is Ubuntu desktop, exclamation mark. And then here we're in John's. So it by default keeps us in my home directory, the file that I was just in. So you can see instead of it saying like this little tilde sign to indicate that I'm in my home directory, it's now showing the full path. So it's /home/nic/downloads because I'm in a different user's downloads file. So let's go ahead and do that to switch over to his, and then we can do cd to switch back into home, because remember we were in his home directory before, and now we can do ls, ls, which I just learned that la also works, and you can see John and Nick, and those are our 2 users who have home directories. But let's go switch back into mine, and here, let's try one thing first. If I do cd/nick, it says no such file or directory exists. Remember, if you type in slash at the front of your change directory, it thinks that you're referring to the root of the system. Because when you do cd/, you go into the root directory, which is pretty much like the C drive of Windows, remember. So I'm going to go back to my home directory, and then cd out of it to home, and then I'm going to do ls. Okay, here's my options, and then I do cd to nick with no slash in front of it, and let's go cd to downloads, no slash in front of it, remember, and then ls, and I want to do gedit name a file, and it says warning, cannot display, permission denied, because this is a folder, this is a file in someone else's account, and I'm just John over here, standard user who doesn't have sudo privileges. So let's try it again with sudo password for John. I'm not in the sudoers file. This incident will be reported. Oh, come on. So let's do I think it's exit. Yeah, if you do exit, then that exit the session of me being logged into John's account. So now I'm back in my account as Nick, and with all my permissions, with all my sudo capabilities. So let's do sudo vsudo, and it asks me for my sudo password. And here we have the sudoers file. This sort of explains the permissions behind who's allowed to sudo, and what permissions they have when they do that. So here you can see pretty much 3 different sections here. User privilege specification, members of the admin group may gain root privileges and allow members of the sudo group to execute any command. I'm not going to dive into this right now because this gets a little bit more complicated, and I just want this to be like a basic intro. But I want you to be aware that things like this file right here are what control who is allowed to sudo, who is allowed to use admin privileges to make those root changes to the system, who's allowed to have root access. So Control X to exit that file, and then you can see there that v to sudo, which is actually located in etc sudoers, and it was a .temp because it was only temporary. It was unchanged. We didn't make any changes to that file. So next, let's do another user account. Let's add another user account, except this time we're not going to do it from the GUI. We're going to do it from the terminal, the command line, and I'm going to do add user Joe. And only root may add a user group to the system. So, okay, well, we got to do sudo add user Joe. And we got to give him a new Unix password. So let's just use the same one for the sake of it. And you got to retype it to make sure that you typed it correctly. And then the full name, if you want, you can just hold down enter and skip past all of this. Or not. You could enter his full name and his room number, work phone, home phone, other, all that. But now let's go ahead and try. Let's do su to Joe, and let's do Joe's password, Ubuntu desktop. And once again, you can see that I'm in home Nick downloads. So if I do cd to the tilde, I'm in Joe's home drive. And you can see now we have 3 users, Joe, John, Nick. Let it exit again. And this time, I'm going to do sudo del user Joe. And removing Joe, warning group, Joe has no more members. Done. So now Joe's gone. And let's cd to /home. Joe, that's not what I meant. And let's do ls. And we still have Joe, John, Nick. So Joe's file hasn't been removed, but no longer can we su to Joe, because no passwd entry for Joe exists. Passwd being the file that controls the user accounts in Ubuntu and Linux. Okay, so one more thing before I get off user accounts is I want to show you the root account. So if we do su, switch user, by default, if you don't enter any username after that, so typically how we've been entering John and Joe after that, if all you do is type in su, you can just type in password, right? And it gives you the password, and you get an authentication failure. Well, that's because so far, we actually haven't given root a password. We haven't enabled his account. So if we do sudo passwd root, we can change his password. And the password was updated successfully. But one more thing, we do a -u after passwd to unlock his account. So password expiry information was changed. And if we do su again, now we are in root at Ubuntu and in /home. So let's do ls, we can see who's there. We can look at the root home directory. We can go to cd/, and here, let's remember earlier how when I tried to go to /home/nick/downloads and I tried to edit one of these files, how I couldn't because John only had a standard user account and he couldn't edit my files. Well, as a root, I have full control over everything, so I don't have to sudo. I don't have to go ahead and give myself administrator privileges. I am root. I am all powerful. So go ahead. Oops, I just hit X. But go ahead here and click save. And then we go ahead and escape here. I'm using my left hand on the mouse because there's a cat sleeping on my right hand. Okay, she has to get off. I can't do this. And then we do cat name of file. And then boom, I'm root, I am all powerful. So once again, you hit exit and that kicks you out of your user session. So I got a couple more things here before I close this out, because I think I've given a pretty decent intro to Ubuntu. If you go to Ubuntu software Okay, we need an app to access the Ubuntu Software Center, so let's just go ahead and let that do its thing. OS updates, okay, it's thinking. Let's also check the software updater. So this is checking for updates, waiting. And when you first do your software updater, it won't work because you actually haven't configured it yet. So if you go to settings and okay, I think it's actually not working because I think by default it actually has proper settings. Anyways, I think it's not working because this is going on in the background. So let's do that. Hopefully that goes quick. Anyways, this is where you install updates. You have important updates, recommended updates, unsupported updates. You can check all those or uncheck ones that you don't want, and you have to authenticate before you do that. So if you don't want unsupported updates, then you can uncheck that. If you want updates, displayed daily, every 2 weeks, daily is probably best. Download and install automatically is typically best, but sometimes you might just want to download automatically or display immediately, because even though it's a security update, sometimes you don't necessarily trust the developer, because oftentimes if an update changes one thing, it could mess with another, and if you don't know that that update's trusted yet, you may not want to do that. So exercise caution, I guess. It's always up to you. Display weekly, immediately, every 2 weeks. We'll just do that. And then notify me of a new version of Ubuntu. If you want to upgrade versions from 16.4 to 10, then you can, for any new version, or if you only want long-term support versions, so when Ubuntu 18 comes out, then you can do that. So once again, personal preference there, really. And then that's what updates are all about in the terminal, or pardon me, in the GUI. But another way to do updates is if you do sudo apt-get update, then that'll run updates for your system. It's unable to lock right now because another process is tying it up, but you can also do apt-get upgrade after you're done your updates to actually go ahead and run those updates and run those installations to make sure all of your apps are updated to the latest and greatest versions. One thing that I also have forgotten to mention, on Ubuntu 16 you no longer have to type sudo apt-get. All you have to do is type apt, which is I guess alright, but I mean, it's been so many years of typing apt-get that at this point it's like, might as well just stick with it. So if you want Ubuntu 16, and I'm assuming onward, obviously, you can just type sudo apt-update instead of apt-get. So it'll save you 4 keystrokes, but what does it really matter? Let's go ahead and take a look at the software center again. Well, that's thinking about it. OS updates. Alright, you know what? Let's go ahead and skip to Nmap. So I want to run an Nmap scan of my computer, and if you type in sudo, because we installed it earlier at the start of this, remember, if you type in sudo nmap localhost, it'll scan your current computer, because Nmap can be used to scan computers within your network. So if you wanted, you could scan the IP address of your phone, if you knew what the IP address of your phone was, like if it was, oops, my numlock was off. 192.168.1.50, if that was the IP address of your phone, you could do that. You could also use ifconfig, which is the command to display your interface information, to display your IP addresses and that sort of stuff. You could use that to find out your own IP address and scan that, but if you use localhost, then you don't have to bother with that. Localhost is also, you're also able to type out 127.0.0.1. Both of those work. So let's just run the exact same command again, except this time with the IP address of 127.0.0.1, and you can see that, well, we didn't actually get the same result. I don't know why it didn't show this port right there, 631, but regardless, just know that that's a thing. Failed to connect, and go online. Okay, maybe my network settings are are messed, but I don't think so. I was able to install Nmap. Either way, Ubuntu Software Center, you can check your installed apps here. This is sort of the way to do it through the GUI, and there's typically a lot of stuff installed by default. It's only if you see something like really obvious that you don't want to be there that you could just like click remove. Image quick software to create, edit, and compose bitmap images. So if you just didn't want it, go ahead and click remove. You can also go ahead and add stuff here, games and whatnot, education, internet, in different browsers, Chromium or Firefox, chat. Got lots of different options. So that's the Software Center. Take a look through it. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I just want to show it off. And then, the Ubuntu software updates. I think that's just to do with my connection right now. Obviously, something's wrong, so fortunately, I won't be able to show that off. But let's try one more thing. Sudo apt-get install OpenSSH. OpenSSH server? Is that the name of it? Okay, right. Okay, so now let's do another Nmap scan of our system, and we'll use sudo nmap localhost. And you can see here that now that we've installed OpenSSH, whereas before we only had this port open, 631, we now also have port 22 open, which is used for the SSH service, the secure shell service. So now other users can remotely connect to our system to be able to remotely manage it, which is pretty important in the open source and Linux world, because a lot of these Ubuntu servers, Linux servers are used for things like web servers. So when you're talking about an organization, a big enterprise, you don't want people to have to go to a data center and plug in directly to be able to make changes. You need people to be able to remotely configure it. So that's that. But before I wrap up, I want to show one more thing. So if we use a few flags here for our nmap command, we're going to stick with -sv, which is verbose, so we're going to get a little bit more information, and we're going to do -st for all TCP ports, and then -su for all UDP ports. So we're doing a more intense scanning here to get a little bit more specific information about our system and what's running on it. So let's just let that go. It's going to take a little bit of time, so yeah. Alright, so our Nmap scan took a couple minutes, and we were able to scan our computer and find out a little bit more about it. So before, pretty much all we had was 631 open IPP, 22 open SSH. This time we see 3 more ports down here. Notably, they're all UDP ports, but whereas before I believe it was only scanning TCP ports, and it wasn't scanning them all. I think it only does like a common port scan at first if you don't specify all with -st. So we're going to kind of forget about this for right now. They're in open filtered state, so it's actually not too big of a concern for me. But we're going to look at these two. So 22 TCP open SSH. By using the verbose command, the -sv, we're able to get the version. It's able to fingerprint the version of software that we're running on that port. So it actually specifically tells us that OpenSSH 7.2 is running, and it's the Ubuntu Linux version. So we can actually identify that based off of a simple Nmap scan. So if you run an Nmap scan on your host, if you're installing a bunch of services, or if a bunch of services are already installed, you can pretty easily identify exactly what those services are. And if you see ones that you don't know about that shouldn't be there, maybe like if you know that your host is a web server, but you see SSH on there, you say, wait a second, is SSH supposed to be on there? Maybe not. Maybe I should remove it. And then if you wanted to, you could do your apt-get remove open SSH server. But sometimes like the name here in the version isn't straightforward. Like as you can see here, it says OpenSSH. So if you thought, oh, it's just OpenSSH, you're wrong. It's actually -server. So if you're not sure about it, if you're not sure about what anything in this line means, your best bet typically is to do the -sv so that you can find out what version it is, because this is pretty much telling you what the software is. And then from there you can use Google to find out OpenSSH. What is OpenSSH? What's the package name for OpenSSH? Because if you Google what's the package name for OpenSSH, you'll find OpenSSH server, and then from there you would know exactly how to uninstall it. Or for something like Apache, which has a package name of Apache 2, then you could do sudo apt-get remove Apache 2. Similarly, if you were going to install Apache, you might just do sudo apt-get install Apache. But that doesn't work unless you put Apache 2, because that's the name of the package. So that's just kind of a quick introduction, a small introduction to services and Nmap. I highly recommend that you mess around with Linux, you make some files, you make some users, you switch user, you move between the directories, you get used to working in the command line. Once again, this is free, so you can download this at home for no cost. And it's a VM, so it's not going to affect your actual host computer. Might slow it down a bit because, you know, VMs do require a little bit of computer resources to be able to run. But you'll learn a lot from it. And if you can get used to services and what the different services are on Linux, then that's going to be your best bet. Because if you're able to identify what software is running on your computer, what it's used for, if it should be there, if it shouldn't be there, that's going to be really helpful, you know, in sort of the security world when you're trying to secure a machine and identify what you need, what you don't need, and that's pretty much it. If I start to talk anymore, I'll start to get into more specifics, and this is supposed to be an introductory level video, so just wanted to give people an idea of how to use Ubuntu. If you have questions, please let me know. I'll try to reply to them. But that's it for this video, so thanks for watching.